Good morning, everyone. I want to encourage you, if you have a Bible or Bible app, go ahead and turn with me. We're going to be over in Psalm 26. We've made our way to Psalm 26, and we're going to look at this Psalm of David. That's what we know about it as far as the subtitle. But this really is a prayer of David. David's praying, and he's sharing with us the contents of that prayer. And he's asking God to vindicate him because of some false accusation by his enemies. And so the themes of this psalm is vindication, it's divine examination, it's this assertion of integrity, it's trusting in God's loyal, unfailing love. It's a commitment to a righteous life, living, and avoiding evildoers. It is a love for God's house, God's presence, a plea for God to redeem him and to destroy the sinners. To not destroy him along with the sinners. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. But we don't not really given any indication as far as the timeline of when this happened, when David wrote this. But, man, we see a lot of themes that we've seen throughout the rest of the Psalms. They're very much themes of David's life. There's lots of Psalms that are written during some challenging times, times of trouble in David's life. And so what we want to do, we just want to dive right in. We're going to look at what this psalm has to say. We're going to see what we can learn about David's circumstance and then our own circumstance, our own lives, and the application of it. And our goal is just to not read this and walk away from it, but instead to meditate on it, to really think about what God's trying to tell us here, what David's saying. And so let's begin there. Let's read the first three verses. He says in chapter 26, verse 1, he says, Psalm 26, verse 1. He says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity. I've also trusted in the Lord. I shall not slip. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my mind and my heart. For your loving kindness is before my eyes. I have walked in your truth." And so look at the first thing that he says there in verse 1. Vindicate me, O Lord. It seems like David's been falsely accused by his enemies about some wrongdoings. And here's what he's asking God: clear me, like prove my innocence, O Lord. And so David is depending upon God to clear him of these unjust accusations, because David realizes that he can't do it himself. Like, he needs God. He realizes that really, no matter what anybody else says, no matter what anybody else thinks or what they say about him, what really matters in the end is what God thinks about us. Either that or David has chosen not to stand up for himself. Sometimes that's the wise decision of some godly men and godly women. The ultimate example was Jesus. He was like a lamb led to the slaughter. He opened not his mouth. He didn't vindicate himself in the midst of many false accusations. Instead, he put his trust in his Father. See, the temptation for us to do is for us to say, "Oh, that's not fair. That's not right. You can't say that about me. I didn't do any of that stuff." But instead, David says, "Hey, I'm not going to vindicate myself. I'm going to trust you, O Lord, to do that." And look at verse 1, the second part there. He says, "For I have walked in my integrity. I have also trusted in the Lord, and I shall not slip." And so he's been accused of something that he didn't do. He's innocent. And David's not saying, "Hey, look, I've never done anything wrong. You can come into my house and look under the rugs, look in the corners, look in all the nooks and crannies. You're not going to find anything there." No. David's saying, in the things that you're accusing me of, I didn't do it. And so David claims to walk in integrity. He is blameless. He is of good character. And here's the three reasons why David knows that God is going to vindicate him. Number one, he's innocent. Number two, he's living a life that is consistent with God. And number three, he's trusting God. And because of that, he knows that he's standing firm, like he's not going to slip. Look at verse 2. He says, "Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my mind and try my heart." David is pleading with God to come in and examine him. Come, try my heart, try my mind. He has a clean conscience in this. This is inviting God to come in and examine and scrutinize him. Reminds me of Psalm 139, where David points out God's all-knowing, all-present, all-powerful, all-righteous, divine power. And then he finishes it in verses 23 and 24 by saying, "Search me, O God, know my heart, try me, know my anxieties, see if there's any wicked way in me, lead me in the way of everlasting." And so again, David's not saying that he's never done anything wrong. We know David's life. We've looked into, if you've studied David's life, you know that he's a sinner. In fact, he's going to plead for mercy later on in this psalm. But in the context, David's innocent here. He was clearly appealing on the basis of innocence. And think about it. Is it possible for us to be innocent? Like, we've kind of given up on the idea of being innocent. We think, well, we're all sinners. We're all human. We all do everything. We all do things wrong. We're all bad. And there's some truth to that. But it's almost like we've starting to wave the white flag on ever doing things right. And we can't do that. Like, we need to recognize our shortcomings. We all have them, but we also need to be seeking to be innocent and to do what is right. David did that. David was able to say, I didn't do anything wrong here. Like, I invite you to come examine me. I'm righteous. I'm innocent here. I've done the right things. And so this is the kind of character that we need to strive for, that we can appeal before God on the basis of justice and righteousness, that we can invite God to come examine us. That we're determined to do the right thing, that with God's strength and with God's guidance, that we can do right. We can be people of honor and integrity. We can be people of character, just like David, even though David fell sometimes. But in this case, David was able to say he was innocent and he did the right things. So look there in verse 3. He says, for your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth. And so this plea was not just based upon David's innocence. It was also based upon God's loving kindness, God's faithfulness. David knew the value of examining and meditating on and setting his eyes before, setting before his eyes God's loving kindness, God's loyal love, as it's described other places, or God's steadfast love, God's faithful care. And to those who are his people, to those who was under covenant with him, to those who are walking in his ways, which is what David says he was doing. And so David was living a life that was consistent with God. And that leads us into the next section where David declares the innocence of his actions. He lists some things that he didn't do. So look there in verse 4. Look at the next section here. Look at verse 4. He says, in verse 4, he says, I have not sat with idolatrous mortals, nor will I go in with hypocrites. I have hated the assembly of evildoers and will not sit with the wicked. I will wash my hands in innocence. So I will go before your altar, O Lord, and I may proclaim with the voice of thanksgiving and tell of all your wondrous works. Lord, I have loved the inhabitants of your house, the habitation of your house, the place where your glory dwells. And so here's what David understood in all of this. In this first part, he understood that it matters who you keep company with. It reminds me of what Paul would say 1,000 years later in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. He says, do not deceive yourselves. Evil company corrupts good habits. Do you know what that verse is really about? That verse is not just about how evil company corrupts your habits, but it's about not being deceived into thinking that you can sit with idolatrous mortals or being with hypocrites or sitting in the assembly of evildoers or wicked people. And it's not going to affect who you are. It's not going to affect the things that you do, because it will. And so think about it. David didn't do that. David was not deceived. David took to heart what Paul wrote 1,000 years later, 1,000 years before David even wrote it. David knew that there was something damaging to your relationship with God in that. And so David didn't do it. And not to say that we can't be around them, but it's about not letting them in your inner circle, not letting them influence you. And David realized the importance of not doing that. David carefully selected who he let in. In fact, it says David hated the assembly of evildoers. David hated those who hated God. David would not sit with them. David is talking about not letting them influence us. And we have to be careful about that. And yet we often let those kind of people influence us. We let them entertain us. We look up to them. We make them our idols. We sit in their assemblies and watch their filth, whether in concerts or on screens in movie theaters or worse, even our own homes. So look at verses 6 through 8. He started talking about the things that he didn't do and the things that he hated. And now he's going to talk about some things that he did do or he will do and the things that he loves. And there's a huge contrast between them. Look, verse 6, what did he do? He will cleanse his hands. Cleanse his hands from his sins because he's not perfect. He cleansed himself before God so that he could go into his altar. There's the next thing. He proclaimed his thanksgiving and he tells others about the wonderful works of God. Those things that Those are things that godly people do. And not only does he give thanks for the things that God's done for him, but he also shares those things with others. That's something we need to work on with this. But what does he love? He loves the habitation of God's house, his tabernacle. That's where God is. That's where God's people are. That's where we come into contact with God. That's where his glory dwells, according to David here. And David longed to love to go to those places. Do we long to love to go to a place where we come into contact with God, where God's people are? Do we love that? I think it's a good question for us. Look at verses 9 and 8, or 9 and 10, I'm sorry. In verse 9, he says, "Do not gather my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloodthirsty men, in whose hands is sinister scheme, and whose right hand is full of bribes." So David is telling God the things that he doesn't want. He doesn't want to be associated with sinners in his death. He doesn't want to associate his life with the bloodthirsty men. Like, David knows what they do. He knows men like that. They're always plotting. They're always looking to get what they get out of things. They're looking for the reward of sinful things, momentary pleasure, fortune, fame and attention, possessions, shortcuts, avoiding shame, or whatever it is that they get out of all those things. Here it is. You do this evil thing and you're going to be rewarded this thing. And he says, don't do that. David's not interested in that. David didn't want to be associated with him, whether in life or in death. He wanted nothing to do with them. So look at verses 11 and 12. We'll finish this out here. In verse 11, the first part of verse 11, he says, "But as for me, I will walk in my integrity. Redeem me and be merciful to me. My foot stands in an even place. In the congregation, I will bless the Lord." So think about the contrast. He just talked about things that evil people do, and he knows what they do or why they do it. And now he's talking about what he will do. He says, "I will walk in integrity." He chooses to be blameless. He chooses good character. He chooses to integrity. Integrity is this idea of being rock-like. It's not crumbling under pressure. Integrity, it's like when what you say, what you do, and what you believe all come together, where it's even. Integrity means doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. Being consistent in our character, being consistent in our character with God. And so in verse 11, he says, "Redeem me and be merciful to me." Again, David's plea is not based upon him being perfect. It's based upon God's redemption and his mercy. David was a sinner like all of us. You examine his life, you know that there was sin there. But David knew that if God was ever going to vindicate him, that it was going to require forgiveness and mercy. So look at verse 12. Let's sum this whole thing up. In verse 12, he says, "My foot stands in an even place, and in the congregation I will bless the Lord." David expresses his resolve and his trust in God. He has confidence. He's confident and stands firm here. In verse 1, he says that I will not slip. And now he says, I'm standing on even ground. Think about it. Despite all of the false accusations, despite all of the dangers that's around him, despite all of the wicked people and them trying to trip him up, them trying to bring him down, them trying to make him slip up, them trying to deceive everybody, David trusted in the Lord, and he was resolved that God would vindicate him. He knew that with God's strength, that he would stand firm on even ground and he wouldn't slip. He's expressing his complete and total confidence in God. I'll tell you what, Psalm 26 is a really incredible psalm. There's a lot in there. And again, a lot of some of the same themes that we've read in some of the other psalms. But I hope that's helpful for you. I hope you're having a great New Year's today. I hope today's going great. And again, maybe just make it a New Year's resolution to not only just read the Psalms or read passages like the Psalms, but to pick it up and think about it as you go throughout the quiet times of your life. You go throughout your drives home. That's really been the purpose of this, is try to put God's word into our hearts, to make it a part of who we are, to make it a part of what we think. I hope that's been beneficial to you. We'll continue to go through this. Next Thursday, we'll go to Psalm 27. Lord willing, I'm going to have some different people join me on this broadcast so we can get some other perspectives of the Psalms. I think it's always helpful to see what others have studied. And we'll keep going through the Psalms, though, no matter what, no matter if it's just me or if it's others. If you would like to be a part of this broadcast, please let me know. I'd love to be able to have you on, possibly. So hope everybody's having a great New Year's Day, and hope everybody has a great evening, great rest of their afternoon. And Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow because we'll probably do another reading. We've been Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We've been going through readings of First John. So I'd love to be able to have you join me then. But have a great rest of your day. God bless everybody.